If you wonder why your podcast isn't growing, chances are your audience is too broad. This is Profitcast. I'm Seth Silvers.
And I'm the real Brian, and thanks for joining us today. Welcome to Profitcast. Glad you're here. We've got so much to talk about. We're excited about this, and we're going to jump into this one. And you know, Seth, it's funny. I'm a multi-passionate, and I know a lot of multi-passionate entrepreneurs and business leaders out there that really struggle with this when it comes to their business, their podcast, all of this stuff. There's too much to talk about. And it's not that you want to be broad and it has nothing to do with, you know, a lack of choosing or a lack of committing. It's not that. It's just that there's a lot to talk about, and a lot of stuff does connect. Even then, I know that defining an audience is so incredibly important. You've got to have an ideal audience, even if you have a little bit broader of a topic. And of course, with a niche or a micro niche podcast, if you're doing a podcast topic or industry where it's very specified, very specific, obviously it's a very easy, relatively easy thing to define your audience correctly. But when you get into that broader topic, or if your company has a little bit more involved in what you do and stuff like that, it's a bit of a challenge. And so we want to talk about what we do and that kind of thing. I've worked with clients, Seth, where sometimes it's very, 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 very specific, and you know exactly what they're doing. It's a one type of product, type of service kind of thing. And then you've got others where, in fact, I had a client, and I still do some work for them, where they're in tech. But when people say, well, what do they do? It's very difficult to define because they're involved in 20 to 30 different industries with a lot of research and development and tech stuff. It's that behind the scenes kind of tech that we all use in our lives today and other people use, but they're the ones that actually invent and develop it. How do you define a company like that? How do you define a podcast like that? Or does that company do 20 different podcasts because, you know, they're a $90 billion company, for example? So these are questions I think that are really good into, and it's great to ask these questions, and it's great to figure out, how do you define your audience correctly, regardless of what kind of an industry you're in.
I think this whole conversation starts at like identifying what you want out of what you're doing. And I think this is one of the most important questions just in life.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm always asking myself and other people, it's like, hey, what do you want? Like if we're hiring people or if I'm talking with team members, like, it's like, what do you want?
Talking to your wife. What do you want?
Yeah.
What do you need? Exactly.
I always joke with, when I have like check-ins with our team, I'm like, what do you want to be when you grow up? But it's like kind of seriously, like in a one-on-one set, like, what do you want to do when you grow up?
Do we actually ever figure that out? That's the best.
I'll let you know when I find out.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Hopefully we're both still alive. But I think this comes back to like, what do you want out of your podcast? Microsoft might be very different because they're huge. Their marketing purposes might be very different. But if you're a small business or medium-sized business, or you're growing as a business, I don't know, let's say you're under $100 million in a year in revenue, which is most businesses out there, then you're probably using a podcast as some kind of a growth tool. It's got to solve specific problems for a specific audience. I will say the most common, I would say, like expression of this that I see, and I've seen this several times this week on different discovery calls with people, is where they know their audience. Like they'll say, okay, our audience is this. But then when you look at the packaging of the episodes, thumbnail, it's on YouTube, title, first 30 or 60 seconds, it doesn't match. And so two examples I saw recently of this. One was a podcast in the construction industry where their target audience and their ideal audience for the show is roofers. They like their whole company, all they serve is roofing companies. Their podcast looks like it's for all construction companies. So I just asked them the question. I was like, oh, do you like, is this intentional? And they were like, oh, well, no. It's really not.
Yeah.
And then the other example that I saw of this was in a real estate podcast, on a call with them just a couple of days ago. And they're one of the top real estate podcasts in the country.
Wow.
And they do, you know, they've done over 1 million downloads. They do a lot of good downloads, a lot of good audience. And so I asked them, I said, who is your audience? And they said, well, it's real estate agents. Like that is our main audience. And so I told them, I said, it's not clear from your packaging because, and I listened to their episodes. The first about 60 to 90 seconds was a pre-recorded intro. And the only moment that real estate agents were identified was in when they mentioned the title of the show. Everything else, it could have applied to like any inspirational person who's wanting to grow a business. And so it was like, this isn't bad. Like you can have a show that is focused on growing a business, but that's not what you're saying it is. So I think it's more about alignment. A lot of people would say like, oh, this is who my audience is. I think it's pretty rare for people to not have any idea who their audience is. It's more rare for the packaging of content and the packaging of a podcast episode to consistently match that, because that just requires so much discipline. There's so many things we want to talk about. And you should tell we've navigated this with this show, because I think you've been on a journey of this, and we've had so many conversations of who is this show for? And if it is for this audience, then let's make sure the content actually reflects that.
There is, like you said, there's a discipline to being concise and talking about, only what you need to talk about and not talking about other things. There is that. I think also too, there's a lack of understanding of how, like you mentioned with the packaging, Seth, which by the way, I agree with. You may know your audience, but when it comes to effectively and actually reaching them and packaging to reach them, I think a lot of people just really don't know how to do that correctly. And I think there's a lot of advice out there. Some of it's good, some of it's not. So I think there's a lot of confusion as to how do you do that? How do you actually make it work? Maybe this would be another episode that we could dive into at some point to discuss here's exactly how to package for your audience. I think that actually would be a good discussion. But going back to Profitcast, to your question, it started off in 2014 as a way to help, because in 2014, podcasting was different. You were looking at it as that you had creators, hobbyists, businesses, all of the above that were saying, we want to create a podcast. We have a topic and or a passion, and we want to take that and we want to profit with it. That was the original intention. And so that's who you were talking to back in the day. And that's actually what this show was designed to do. Then podcasting changed. You had a lot more businesses come in. You had, large organizations like NPR, celebrities, all that would start coming in, and they changed the landscape. And so things have evolved. It's not, you can't just put a podcast out there and hope people are going to find it. It just doesn't work that way anymore. And nothing's really changed in the world of focus and getting into the niche of your show or your topic or whatever. That's all remained the same. But as we've evolved to now, we want to talk to business leaders and business owners about how to start and grow a profitable podcast. It has been about, who are we trying to talk to? Are we talking to the business leader, the business owner, the entrepreneur, or the marketing director? Who are we talking to? And do those people, have time to actually consume our show? Are you going to find us naturally? How do we reach you and find you first? Or are we talking about, which, this is another episode, are we getting into, it's not about necessarily finding the people with our podcast. It's about finding those people from a different way and then sending them to our podcast as a resource to nurture and, help them and deliver value to them and that kind of thing too. So, I still have this question. This is just one of those questions I think that I struggle with, is that how do you really reach somebody directly? And then why are we attracting people that we didn't intend to reach? It's always another question too, is like, well, it's not a bad thing, but why? It's the curiosity in me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's true. And I think for us with this show, it's important that when business owners come, when they're looking at the titles, when they're looking at the episodes, when they're listening in, they're hearing like, oh, I'm home. It would be good to do another episode kind of on the packaging side of things, because I think that is something we were just talking before we hit record. Like, you and I take a lot of things for granted that we that we think of just normally because we've done it. But then when people are getting into podcasting, they're like, oh, I didn't even really think about that. Yeah, but I do think this all really does come back to, for us as an agency, we always help people, you should be creating your podcast for one person. I was talking to somebody this week and they're starting a podcast, and him and I know each other because we worked at a church together like 15 years ago or something. And I was like, if you were speaking at this church on a Sunday morning and there was 4,000 people in the arena, whatever we can call a sanctuary for 4,000 people, we can call it an arena. If you're speaking to that, you're going to speak differently than if you're leading a middle school boys Bible study with 10 people.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to communicate differently on stage in front of everybody than you will with 10 middle school students that you're trying to mentor.
Very true.
It's thinking through that with your audience. We want you to think about, who's that one person that I'm creating this content for? And I think this kind of gets a little bit into something we're talking about in a future episode more in depth, but where we talk about like the 3 types of podcasts is it a hobby podcast? Is the podcast a business? If it's a business, you just need to try and grow it as big and fast as you can so that you can get sponsorships, which is going to come with as many eyeballs as you can. Mm-hmm. Or is your podcast kind of like building the business?
Mm-hmm.
And so again, I think if you don't have clarity on those three things, it's going to be really hard to know who you're talking to and how you should be talking to them. And again, it's half of the battle of this is taking time to pause and ask yourself these questions of, who is my podcast for? If that person comes to my podcast, are they going to feel like they're at home and they're comfortable and they know this is for me and this is going to solve my problems?
Yeah.
And on the flip side, if somebody that is not in my target audience comes to our YouTube page, to our Spotify, to our Apple Podcast page, are they going to look at it and be like, not for me? Because they should. And you shouldn't be trying to keep those people around.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. And I like what you're saying too about, speaking to one person. And that's something actually that I mean, even from a connection performance presentation standpoint, I talk about that too. And so this actually goes hand in hand with that. Not only, your focus of what you're talking about and the effectiveness of your podcast, but also how you come across. Because when you're talking to all you guys out there or all you people listening and all that, like now it's as a listener or as a viewer, I'm nobody. I'm just some random person. You're talking to a bunch of us. But when you're talking to you, like, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching our show. Mm-hmm. How can we help you today? And you know exactly who that listener is. And so, if we're talking about that, our ideal listener is probably going to be very much a business leader who is looking to put a podcast in for their business to help nurture and grow their audience and their customers and their clients and stuff like that, then we know that we can talk to that person directly. And so it's very much a you-focused thing because you are the only one consuming our show right now. Whoever you are, right? It doesn't matter. Like, you might have 100,000 listeners and viewers, but you are the only one that matters because you are the one listening, you are the one watching, and that's what. Hopefully that makes sense. But that's a big thing that you bring up. So not only does that make the person feel valued and heard and listened, talked specifically to, but it also does very much design everything that you say through that funnel, and that person goes, man, you get me. Like, you get what my business needs right now. I need you.
I'm never going to be like, Brian, did you listen to this podcast episode? It was completely average. Like, that doesn't happen. Or like when we're talking about like what we're watching on Netflix. Yeah. Or like when we're talking about Netflix, it's like, it's either good or bad. Yeah. I will tell you about what I watched on Netflix if it is popular, but it's a waste of time. I will be like, Brian,
true.
I watched this show. It sucks. Don't waste your time.
Yeah.
I won't say, oh, we watched this show and like, it was kind of just background. I was like on my phone. It was like, it was okay. And if I do say that, it's certainly not going to motivate you to watch it.
No, if anything, you're trying to get me to not watch it. Like, it was a waste of time. I wouldn't do it.
Yeah. So usually we just don't talk about things that are mediocre.
That's true.
We talk about things that solve specific problems.
Yeah.
And so I think that podcasts grow more in line of things like, oh, you're wanting to learn about crypto. I just listened to a podcast episode where the guy is way smarter than me and he explains it all really, really well in a 30-minute episode. You should just go listen to this and it will help you understand it. Or you might say like,
that'd be helpful.
Oh, you're starting a podcast for your business. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of podcasts about podcasting, but you should listen to Profitcast because it actually looks at it through the lens of a business. And they talk about it addressing the concerns that a business would have. That's kind of how we talk about things. Or a conversation I had with somebody this week where we might be taking over their podcasts. It would be like, oh, you're a history buff. Like, you like American history. Did you know that the first 50 years of American history has dramatic impacts on how things are happening today in our country? And there's this podcast that makes all of those connections between the first 50 years of America as an established country and what's happening today. That's interesting. And if you're interested in history, then you're gonna be like, oh, I definitely want to listen to that.
That is interesting.
But if it was like, oh, do you want another like history podcast about American history? It's like,
no,
boring. Like, I don't know. So again, it's this specificity. And then like we talked about at the beginning of the episode, if you give that specificity and then people come to that history podcast and all the episodes are super general American history, it's like all the stories you've already heard. It's not creative. Like, the episodes aren't creatively titled. It doesn't look interesting if the packaging of it doesn't, and the content of it doesn't match that specific way that people are talking about it, then those people aren't going to stick around. So I think it's about getting to this specificity where the majority of people that you tell or that hear about your podcast are probably not that interested, But the ones that are interested, they know it's for them and they become super listeners. And I think that's how podcasts grow. You shouldn't be trying to reach everybody with most podcast strategies.
Yeah.
There's some where it's a little bit different. But with most, it's got to be specific. And then the content has to support that specific ask.
Very true. Even for those of us who are multi-passionates, you don't want to reach everybody. I mean, you just don't. Like, you might want to be reaching other multi-passionates.
I had a conversation with a friend who owns a business. And this like really changed my perspective, because for me, my agency, we're almost 10 years old. Like we're 10 years old in the fall. I'm starting to think about like, I should throw like a 10-year birthday party for my business.
You totally should. Yeah. 10-year cruise. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. That sounds better. Leave you all behind. I'll celebrate.
I was going to say, everybody's going with you.
No. For the first 5 years, it was like I was doing so many different things in marketing. And I kind of needed that first 5 years to like fumble around and figure out business, especially because I can be stubborn. And so I wasn't necessarily like, I was learning from other people, but I was trying to do it all on my own. And I needed that time, but we were not specific. We were doing almost anything that could be connected to marketing and storytelling, whether it was like video or blogging or anything, and pretty much anything other than podcasting, because I didn't realize how cool podcasting was.
Nice.
So then once we started in podcasting, it was more specific and we started to get more referrals. Then once we specifically said, and I like made a post about it saying, we are not doing anything else other than helping businesses launch and grow podcasts. The amount of referrals we started to get was actually was like life-changing, because it kind of like took the business into this space where, oh, now we're getting all of this. We're people know what to refer us for. They know what to recommend us.
Yeah.
I have this friend. He's one of my very close friends. His business has 3 different focuses. He talks about branding. He talks about podcasting. He talks about AI. So that's like the definition of multi-passionate. And I kept on like talking to him about like, man, like focus, like pick one of these and scale it, like pick one and scale it. And finally I had the conversation and I told him, I was like, and these numbers are made up. I can't remember what numbers we really said, but it was like, would you be happier bringing in $500,000 a year into your business and you having like the freedom that you want, but getting to do 3 things? Would you be happier with that than you making $1.5 million a year and you only doing one of those? And he said, hands down, the first one.
Yep.
And that was such a good moment for me to see.
Yeah.
Where again, it all comes back to, what do you want? If you want to grow a show in an industry that is a top show in that industry from like the value that it brings, and you want that podcast to be funneling people into your business that is solving people's problems and making money, then you should be really, really narrow with who you're trying to reach. If you want to have a podcast that's a little bit more of a hobby show and you're talking about all the things that you're interested in, then your expectations just need to match that.
Yeah.
And so it's a kind of a long-winded story of explaining like, there's not really a right answer. It really is more about like aligning your strategy with what you actually want. And that can be totally different things. And I think especially with what you're saying about multi-passionate, like, like you talk about a bunch of things on your podcast, on the Real Brian Show, and it's fun.
Yeah.
Like the variety is part of it.
Yeah. And it's not a business though. That's the thing. Like it's intended to be more for fun and more as a entertainment thing for listeners. But the people that come are those that say, I hate niche podcasts. I hate things that talk about one thing. And your show has literally changed my life, and it's been refreshing because that's what we want.
Everybody go listen to the Real Brian Show.
Yeah, you should. You should totally check it out.
It is fun. And there's times when I listen to your show, I am so often in this like very focused business podcast world.
Yeah.
That there's times where I need to come out of that, and I need to be able to listen to something that is like not trying to make money and not trying to like solve specific problems. It's entertainment. And that's where I think the entertainment genre of podcasting is a little bit different than everything we're talking about.
Well, but entertainment can make money too. So there's the business side of entertainment that I think gets overlooked as well, because it's a fascinating. I've seen a lot of people who have made a ton of money as a business from the entertainment side of things. And so, yeah,
for sure.
It's definitely there.
Yeah.
No, I like.
Yeah, you do a good job with it.
I appreciate that. I like what you're saying though. And honestly, I love that story, because I would be in his boat too, where it would be like, if I was making enough money, obviously you don't want to be struggling and, not being able to, if you're making enough money and you're doing just fine and all that, I would take option 1 over option 2 as well, because it would give me the freedom to do more of what I love and what brings me, like what makes me come alive, but also what utilizes my talents. I mean, the thing about a multi-passionate that I think a lot of people don't understand is that we can do a lot of things. We have a lot of interests. We have a lot of curiosity. We're fast learners. I mean, there's a lot of stuff there. And so when people that are in a multi-passionate scenario get pigeonholed, it actually decreases their value and their output and all the other things. So that could be the same thing for a business too. In fact, I've started multiple things over the years that it started off with a little bit more variety and it did well. It wasn't amazing, but it did well. But then all the advice was, you got a niche, pick one. So I followed that advice and I picked one thing and it killed it. And I did that probably 2 or 3 times before I learned my lesson that sometimes picking 1 or 2 things when you have the right mix of variety actually is a detriment to what you were trying to do. But again, this goes back to, I think it comes down to this, Seth, like it's an expectation, right? So I still needed to define my audience correctly. So I didn't have a broad audience. I had a specific audience, whether this was a podcast or a business or whatever. But the reality is that you can still have variety within that audience that you've defined, as long as your audience understands that you're talking to them and that audience knows what they're getting, what they're buying, whatever it is you're selling or offering and that kind of thing. If the expectation is met, you're going to be fine in that sense.
Yeah.
I think the problem what you run into, like you said quite a few times actually, is that there is no, like, who's this for? And then, or with the history thing, it's like, hey, this talks about the first 50 years, that has defined everything for America. You know what? That's fascinating to me, right? But if they tell you that's what it is, like you said, and then the podcast itself has nothing to do with that, well, then expectation is not met. And that's what, so it comes down to defining it, packaging, and then actually delivering it too. I think that's the other thing, is like, you have to make good on what you said you were going to do and what you were going to give them. So I love this stuff.
This was from the EOS conference where you and I just were. For our listeners, Brian and I were in DC. My company, Story On, we sponsored the EOS conference. And so we were there and I got to speak and I gave a great presentation with my fly down the whole time. It was wonderful.
But it was a good presentation.
It was a good presentation. Very memorable.
Yeah.
No, it went well. But so for about 3 days, we were talking to different business owners and talking to them about if a podcast makes sense for them. The company I was talking with, their history museum. I think you were the one who talked with them, the old Stolbridge Museum.
Yeah. Okay. I just didn't hear about the first 50 years of our country. I didn't hear that part though.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. So they're this like live history museum, this live history like village in Massachusetts. And they're not necessarily, it's not like Colonial Williamsburg where it's just like a recreation of how that town operated. It's more of a collection of historical moments and exhibits and stuff. And they have I think they have like 80 buildings, like historical buildings on their property. And they have, real historians there and all of this stuff. But as we were talking about it, about 75% of the people that come to this museum are like families. They're not history buffs. They're like moms that are looking to entertain their kids, or like dads that are looking to do something with their family. And about 25% are like the history buffs.
Yeah.
But a lot of the focus of the history that they follow is kind of the 50 years post signing of the Declaration. And their belief in what they've realized is that there's a lot of really important things that happen in that 50-year period that can be drawn directly to some of the things that are going on today.
Interesting.
So the podcast for them will probably focus on, even though that 25% is a smaller audience, I have a feeling that 25%, that those are probably your evangelists. Like those are probably the people that want more information outside of the museum. And those are probably the people that are going to like post about you and talk about you. So even though it's a smaller audience, that's going to be the audience that is like a little bit more focused. And so again, there could be like, there's multiple audiences that are coming and interacting with their businesses, but from a marketing perspective, you kind of want to have the clarity of who are you actually talking to.
And seeing that as a podcast that I would consume is knowing.
Yeah. And then if you were in Boston, you would probably go to the
absolutely.
museum.
And it's interesting you say that, because there's a lot of history podcasts out there and I'm not a history buff at all. I enjoy some of it, but that particular one, just what you said there intrigues me massively, and I would absolutely consume that show. And then, yeah, definitely, because I want to go to Boston someday. I've never seen it. I'd love to go, and I would definitely, I would go to that museum. It's interesting too. You said that because, history repeats itself, right? And people don't always learn from history. And so that's a wonderful lesson that I think if you're thinking about what kind of a podcast that I should offer for my business, it's kind of like you can learn from all of these things. There's a lot of FAQs. There's a lot of things that they have the same questions, nothing new under the sun kind of thing. There's a lot you can take advantage of on this kind of stuff too.
You could be answering the same questions as somebody else, and some people are going to like you more than me, Brian.
Yeah, great point. Great point.
So I could start a show like the Real Brian Show, and I could even copy you, and I could be 1 week later, and I could talk about the same topics that you do.
Yeah,
and there are some people, very few, but there's probably at least one person out there that would rather listen to me than Brian.
Oh,
probably
at least,
99. That would, at least one.
You never know.
I'd get at least one person.
Half of them would be like, dude, Seth's so much better than Brian.
I could steal at least 1% of your audience.
At least, yeah, at least.
So I think that's something as well as a lot of people, they're like, oh, it's too saturated. There's already a podcast about roofing construction companies. There probably is, but you're doing things different and you're talking about things different. And so I think that's a really important piece of it as well, is recognizing some people are going to like you more. And that's just how it is. You're going to bring a different personality, or bring different stories, all that stuff.
Perspective.
I think kind of like bringing this home, this can get complicated, but at the end of the day, this really is about who is your specific audience, have one person in mind, and what problems are you solving for them? When I'm creating content, I'm thinking about a business owner whose business they are growing, probably not brand new. They're getting customers regularly. They have enough business they have enough cash to run their business. They have wanted a podcast. When they see other businesses that have podcasts, they're like, we could be doing that, and we probably should be doing that. And they want to do it right, and they just kind of don't know where to start. That's who I'm thinking of when I'm creating content. And so I want to create content that solves their problems. So at the end of the day, there's so many different styles of podcasts, and we've talked about some of that, but it really just comes back to, are you creating specific content that solves specific problems for a specific audience? Like, it really is just about that. Because if people come to your show, you talked about the expectations piece. And I think that's really important, because if somebody comes to a YouTube channel, or they come to your podcast and they hit follow, used to be subscribe. Sorry, podcasting OGs.
Yeah.
It's not really subscribe anymore. But if they hit follow, what they're doing with that is they're saying, I would like more of this. Give them more. Like if they say, I want more of this, if we create one podcast episode that's for business owners, and business owners listen to it, and then they're like, man, I want more of this. And then the next episode is for dancers, and we're talking about how dancers can leverage podcasting, then it's probably going to be a little bit different. And they're going to be like, well, this isn't what I signed up for. I'm going to unfollow. The next episode is going to be all about how dancers can start podcasts.
There you go.
No,
it's actually a really good idea. Hey, so it's about businesses utilizing podcasts. I mean, that's the thing, and that's kind of what we talk about. So.
You said it well, though. It's about the expectations.
It really is.
Giving people what they want to come, they want to know what to expect, and you want to deliver on those expectations. And if you do that, people will continue to come back. And guess what? Business owners know business owners. Yep. Roofers know roofers.
Yep.
They will talk with their community about what is helping them solve their problems.
Absolutely. Expectations is a big thing. That might be a very interesting discussion in general to go a little bit more into, because we all expect things based on what we're told, whether it's spoken or unspoken. And I feel like in the world of content creation, it's mostly unspoken, because you say something and whether you deliver it or not is up to you, but your listeners don't always talk back, so you don't know exactly how they're feeling. But that's something to remember. One of the things I was just going to say is your ideal listener, your ideal audience person, if they're watching, could be you. I mean, how many times have people said this? Could be you 2 years ago or 5 years ago, where you were at, and you're helping those people to get to where you're at today too. So you might even be talking to yourself in the past tense, if that makes sense. And so that's something else to consider, because I know a lot of times businesses struggle to find who are we talking to? Who are we trying to really serve effectively right now? And it is hard. And I've had a hard time trying to make up some person, with a podcast or with a business.
Mm-hmm.
But it's easy to go, and if I'm talking to myself 2 years ago, I've got all these questions. And so you could be answering, and you're not the only one, of course. So anyway, that's just a side thing that you could be talking to and talking about. Anyway, but I love this. Yeah. I fully agree with you, Seth, on this one, that really defining your audience, it's incredibly important, but it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. And so, we'd love to help you define that, in your content strategy piece is, who are you trying to reach? And it is easier from someone like us who we're looking on from the outside. You're bouncing these ideas off of us and we're able to say, I think that's the one. It's hard to see it yourself, right? Because you're stuck in the mire. So anyway, I'm just throwing that one out that we'd sure love to talk to you if you have any questions and help you out in that area. But great topic though. Thanks for bringing this one up, Seth, and appreciate you, leading this discussion and going from there. But rockmypodcast.com. I'd love to hear from you guys. Seth's is storyon.co. Mine is realbrianmedia.com. We do work together though, by the way. So we have a lot of fun together, and, we'd just love to help you out and get your podcast off the ground and get it successful and get it done well. So thanks for joining us, Seth.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll see you all next time.